I used to think I'd always know when I stopped belonging. The kettle clicked off before it hissed. I hadn't noticed it reaching boil. I poured the water into the mug, careful not to spill. The old ceramic had a crack down the side faint, like a healed scar, and the words, "World's Best Cook," were barely readable. Jessica gave it to me on a fourth grade Mother's Day wrapped in tissue and tape, not a ribbon. I still used it most mornings. Some habits never ask permission to stay. My phone vibrated against the counter. I didn't rush. I wiped a water ring near the spoon drawer, let the call go to voicemail. But then it rang again. Same number. I picked it up. "Hi, Mom. Just a quick thing." I waited. "For Sunday, you probably don't need to come. It's mostly Eric's side. His parents, you know how they are." The silence between us was too thin to lean on. I set the spoon down. "It's Ella's birthday, I know, but we're just doing something small this year. Low key. You understand." There was no question in her voice, only structure. I said I understood. "Okay, thanks. I'll drop off some photos afterward." Then the line was dead. I hadn't said goodbye. I didn't finish the tea. The surface had cooled a skin forming over the liquid. I tipped it into the sink and rinsed the cup like it hadn't held anything at all. Later, out of habit more than curiosity, I opened my laptop. I wasn't looking for anything in particular, just the usual check-in. The weather, the news, a recipe I probably wouldn't cook. I typed Jessica's name into the search bar out of muscle memory. She'd once asked me not to like her posts. She said it made her co-workers ask questions. The photo was the first thing I saw, a long table under string lights. Ella wore a pink paper crown, the kind I used to fold myself from old wrapping paper. Eric was beside her arm, slung casually around her shoulders. Jessica leaned in one hand, cupping Ella's cheek. On the far end, Eric's parents. His sister, her husband, a few faces I didn't know. The caption read, "The best kind of family is the one that feels complete." There were 9 people in the picture. I closed the laptop. No sudden movement, no breath held. Just the soft click of a lid folding shut. I didn't tell anyone. Not Adam, not Claire, not even Joanne. When she called later that week about the insurance policy renewal, I said everything was fine. That evening, I folded laundry on the couch. Ella's dress from last year's birthday still hung in my hallway closet. The one she spilled juice on and cried until I said it made the fabric look like stained glass. She laughed, then forgot. Children are generous like that. I folded a towel with uneven edges. It was one from the old beach house, frayed but soft. Jessica always hated those towels, said they smelled like closed spaces. I thought of that phrase often. Closed spaces. When had mine become one? I checked my phone again, around 7:40. Nothing. I tapped into Jessica's profile once more, not sure why. A second photo had been added, this one closer up. Ella holding a cupcake. Frosting on her nose. Jessica had commented under it. "She's growing up so fast." I blinked and she was 8. I blinked too. And somehow I wasn't invited. The next morning, I folded the shopping list into my purse and left the house early. I didn't need much. Just milk tea and a lemon. But I walked every aisle like I used to when I had a reason to cook in quantities. The sale bins still called to me. I almost picked up a second bag of flour before remembering no one bakes with me anymore. Near the checkout, I passed a neighbor I hadn't seen since William's funeral. She smiled a little too politely, the way people do when they're unsure if you recognize them. I nodded, but we didn't speak. At home, I unpacked everything slowly. The lemon had a soft spot near the base. I set it aside. The mail had come. A single envelope from the pharmacy. I opened it, thinking of the refill I'd already called in. Inside, just the receipt. No note. Nothing new. That afternoon, I rearranged the linen drawer. Not because it needed it, but because it gave my hands something to do. In the back, I found one of Jessica's old school sweaters, light blue, the cuffs still faintly stained from ink or paint. I sat on the edge of the bed and held it for longer than necessary. She used to fall asleep in that sweater after staying up too late reading. I would turn off her lamp, gently tug the book from her lap, and place a bookmark between the pages. She never noticed. That evening, a message came in. It wasn't from Jessica. It was from her husband. "Hey, just wanted to let you know, thanks for understanding. Jess gets overwhelmed this time of year. No greeting, no name. Just one more way of telling me I wasn't needed." I didn't respond. I took the sweater to the washing machine. It didn't smell like anything anymore. I don't know when I stopped being someone they made space for. I only know I saw it in a photo before anyone told me. And I've learned that absence, when handled long enough, stops being pain. It becomes shape, edges, definition. Like a cup that once held warmth and now only reminds you it can. I never thought usefulness could become a kind of disguise. There was a time when Tuesday and Friday afternoons belonged to me. Jessica called them buffer days, the ones she needed for calls that couldn't be interrupted, and deadlines that came with red exclamation marks in her inbox. I never asked what she did on those days. I just arrived at noon with pre-packed snacks and a fresh pair of clothes for the kids. Once, I brought a puzzle of the solar system. Max gave it 3 minutes before asking for the tablet. Ella took longer, maybe 10 minutes. I remember her saying the planets looked lonely. I told her that space was quiet, not lonely. She didn't look convinced. The house always had a faint citrus smell, like something had just been wiped down. I never sat on the couch unless I was asked. I usually stayed in the kitchen or on the back porch, folding laundry that wasn't mine. One afternoon, I folded a cardigan of Jessica's charcoal gray with small silver buttons, delicate like jewelry. One was missing. I placed it in a separate pile and set a note on top. The next day, it was gone, and no one mentioned the note. After that, I stopped writing them. At dinner one evening, they asked about spring break plans. Jessica looked at me over the edge of her wine glass. "You're okay to cover those 2 days, right?" Eric didn't look up from his phone. Max dropped a spoon, and it clattered too loud in the room. I nodded. That seemed to be enough. That same night, I made roasted chicken. I used the same seasoning I always had. William liked it that way. Rosemary and lemon, nothing else. I didn't realize Eric avoided citrus. He didn't say anything directly. He pushed the food around his plate and excused himself early. Jessica stayed behind to load the dishwasher. "You know he can't do lemon. It messes with his throat." I didn't answer. I scraped the leftovers into the trash and wiped down the counters with the back of my sleeve when the towel wasn't nearby. Later, she handed me a stack of folded dish towels. "You don't need to bring your own anymore. We have plenty." I took the stack home anyway. I didn't want hers to smell like my hands. There was a winter where I kept a notebook of small things I thought might help babysitter back up numbers, a recipe for dairy-free mac and cheese, a quote Ella had written on the whiteboard that I didn't want lost. I gave it to Jessica in a manila envelope tied with a blue ribbon I had saved from one of Ella's old gifts. She left it on the entryway bench for 3 weeks. Then it disappeared. She never said a word about it, neither did I. Once during tax season, I asked her if the joint savings account William left was still accruing interest. I'd heard something about frozen balances and expiration clauses on the radio. She didn't look up from her screen. "Mama, you don't need to worry about those things anymore. Just rest. Just rest." I didn't mention it again. That night, I baked 2 loaves of banana bread and gave one to the neighbors. The other stayed untouched on the counter until I wrapped it in foil and froze it. Eric liked to host. Not parties, dinners with names like strategy meals and connection nights. Jessica said it helped his firm stay competitive. Once, I offered to help with serving just to be involved. She handed me a blouse still on its hanger. Maybe not that cardigan this time. It was the same one I'd worn to her graduation. The sleeves were thinner now, the elbows beginning to sheen. I kept it anyway. There's a kind of quiet in fabric that remembers your shape. I wore the blouse, pale blue structured. The collar felt tight. Eric introduced me as Jessica's mother. He didn't say my name. I smiled when people looked my way and cleared plates without being asked. One of the guests left a wine ring on the table. I wiped it before it could set. The next day, Ella showed me a drawing she'd made of everyone at dinner. There were stick figures in suits, one woman in a triangle dress, and a small figure in the corner with no face. I asked who that was. "That's the helper," she said. I folded the paper into fourths and put it in my coat pocket. It stayed there until summer. A few weeks later, Jessica sent me a text during a team meeting. I was at the grocery store comparing prices on olive oil. "Can you pick up Ella at 3 daycare called? She's coughing." I replied yes. She didn't respond. That night, she thanked me with a nod. No more, no less. I learned to stop expecting extra words. One Sunday, Max ran through the living room with muddy shoes. Jessica asked him to stop. He kept going. She turned to me. "You know you're allowed to say something too, right?" I said nothing. I rinsed the floor with a rag that used to be one of William's undershirts. It smelled faintly of old soap and lemons. There's a phrase William used to repeat when I stayed up too late cleaning: "You're doing invisible work." He said it gently, as if to remind me the house only noticed when something was forgotten, not when everything was in place. I think about that now. Not as a complaint, not as a wound, just as a fact. Invisible things don't leave marks, but they do weigh something. Ooh. They live in coffee spoons with worn handles, in drawers where no one looks, in guest towels no one uses. And if I disappear, I'll know exactly which corner I vanished from. I no longer expect anything with handwriting. The card was folded twice, the paper softened at the crease resting beneath a pile of coupons I hadn't clipped, and receipts no longer legible. It must have been tucked there for years, one of those drawers where things go to be forgotten, but not thrown away. Merry Christmas from all of us. No Mom, no Nancy. Just that single printed line in faux gold font next to a snowman with a felt hat. The kind of generic greeting you send when you want to say something without saying anything. I turned it over once. The back was blank. I set it upright against the sugar jar and stared at it while the kettle hissed. Something about it felt intentional, how it said everything and nothing in the same breath. Jessica had once said handwritten notes made things feel unprofessional. She'd sent me a thank you email the year I refinished her dining chairs. It began with just looping back and ended with much appreciated, no punctuation. There was a dinner for Adam years ago when he got that scholarship to Vermont. Trade and energy systems. Not flashy, but steady. I made chicken pot pie from scratch and pulled out the quilted table runner William's sister had stitched. Jessica arrived late. Her makeup was fresh. She didn't take off her coat. While Adam was telling us about the campus labs, she glanced at her phone. "I think they give those kinds of scholarships out pretty freely now. They're looking to meet quotas." Adam fell silent after that. After dessert, he helped me carry dishes to the sink. I told him the kitchen looked better when he stood in it. He smiled and wiped his hands without a word. I found his acceptance letter in the recycling bin the next morning, still unfolded, still uncreased. I ironed it between 2 cookbooks and placed it inside William's old manila folder labeled Good Things. There weren't many papers in there. One time I asked Jessica about William's joint savings account. It wasn't a confrontation, just a small question like asking whether the porch light had been left on. Eric took care of that. You don't need to worry. That's not your lane anymore. Not your lane? I nodded and returned to wiping down the fridge door. Not because it needed cleaning, but because it was something to hold on to. Later, I alphabetized the spices in her cupboard. Someone had moved the rosemary to a lower shelf. There was a glass bowl I'd brought from home that I used for mixing cracked near the lip, but it held. One day it disappeared from their kitchen without a word. When I asked casually if they'd seen it, Jessica opened a new cabinet and showed me a set of stainless steel bowls, nested spotless, labeled with exact quart sizes. These are easier to clean. We donated the old stuff. The old stuff. I stopped bringing things after that. Then came the envelope. It was thick with a typed address. My name looked like it had been copy-pasted. The return address was from another state, one I'd never been to. I opened it carefully, as if something might spill out. Inside was a brochure printed on soft gloss paper. A smiling older woman stood near a pond. The caption, "Brookshire Meadows, where dignity meets ease." Tucked inside were 6 clipped pages, a checkbox form, pre-marked, pre-approved. My legal name filled in, followed by Jessica's signature below mine. Jessica Randall, on behalf of Nancy Walker. On a separate page in her handwriting, blue ink, small and slanted. Mom, I've reserved your place for next month. Everything is handled. No need to worry. You'll be comfortable. No question. No space for response. Just a declaration, a plan. Already paid for. The kettle boiled and clicked off. I hadn't realized I'd turned it on. I poured the water into a mug I'd gotten from a garage sale 20 years ago. The ceramic was chipped along the rim, but the handle fit my fingers perfectly. I sat by the window where the planter used to be. The lavender I once grew was long gone, torn out, when Eric decided to pave over the side path for extra parking. They attract bees, he said once, brushing past me on his way out. There had been a flower box there. Jessica carved her initials into it when she was 12. She used a screwdriver. The W in Walker was missing a leg. I ran my hand along the frame before it was dismantled. The wood had started to splinter soft from too much rain. I thought I'd replace it in spring. But spring passed. Then another. Now there's only a strip of gravel and a faint tire mark where something once grew. That evening, I placed the brochure and forms into a large envelope and sealed it, not to mail, but to contain. I set it in the drawer under the table where I kept old candles and batteries that no longer held charge. I didn't tear anything. I didn't write a reply. I didn't call. There's a sound. Silence makes when it presses against your chest, like the hush before snowfall. Not empty, just weight without shape. I made toast that night. I used the last slice of sourdough and watched the edges brown too dark. I scraped them gently with a knife. I ate standing without butter. Upstairs in my jewelry box, there's a gold chain I wore only once. Jessica gave it to me for Mother's Day 5 years ago. She said, "Simple is better." I've never worn it again. It rests beside a brooch I bought for myself when no one remembered my birthday. I keep both. Not because I'm waiting, but because they remind me there was a time I believed small things meant something. They still do. Even now when no one asks what I think. Even now when my name appears only on envelopes I didn't send. Even now I fold what's mine neatly, quietly, so at least I know I was once here. I used to think signatures were permanent. The pen skipped slightly on the withdrawal form. The ballpoint didn't catch right away, so I pressed harder. The bank teller, young sharp haircut, navy tie, too tight, kept glancing at his screen. Then back at me. Then to a woman standing behind him who wore a name tag that read Senior Manager. They didn't ask me to step aside, but something in their silence shaped a distance. We're unable to proceed with this request at the moment. There's a hold on the account pending a guardianship review. I looked down. The paper trembled at the corners, though the air was still. Filed under medical proxy and care authority. He continued, initiated by Jessica Randall. My name was still printed across the top of the statement, black ink on white. But the signature below wasn't mine. Not this time. No one had called. There was no envelope. No knock. Just an erasure carried out with the clinical efficiency of a stapled form. I stood there long enough that someone in line cleared their throat. Not loudly, just enough to remind the room I was still there. At home, I opened the bottom drawer where William used to keep the house records. Envelopes layered in uneven stacks, some with his slanted handwriting still visible in pencil. I found the folder with the original will, dated and notarized. The lines were clear. I was named as full beneficiary executor and sole custodian of the property. And yet, in the copies Jessica had submitted, emailed under her name titled with legal tags like Health Support Allocation. The house was labeled Asset for Long-Term Medicaid Offset. I reread the phrase 3 times. A sentence that took away walls, that turned the porch where I once hung lights into recoverable collateral. The next morning, I walked to the garden. The lavender thought long gone had started to bloom again. Purple rising through soil that hadn't been turned in a season. I hadn't watered it. I hadn't expected anything to return. I remembered Jessica's voice flat as an invoice. It's just more efficient this way. And then, Eric weeks before holding out a stack of mail. You're not really in a position to manage this anymore. Each syllable had landed like a stamp on a form already filed. I reached down and touched one of the blossoms. The stem was strong but not unbreakable. I let it go. Later, I picked up the phone. I didn't scroll through contact. I didn't search. I dialed the one number that didn't feel like a favor. Adam answered on the second ring. He didn't say hello or what's wrong. He said, "Hi, Mom." Adam didn't fill silence. He let it settle, let me breathe. I didn't say anything about the bank or the file or the word guardianship. I just asked how his classes were going, whether the campus was cold this time of year. He spoke for a while about a professor who wore bow ties and played jazz records before lecture. I let the sound of his voice press gently against the places that had gone hollow. At some point, he paused. Are they doing something again? I didn't answer. The word again caught somewhere in the back of my throat. He didn't repeat the question. There was a framed photo of him on my kitchen shelf, taken when he was 10, one sock pushed down, holding a bug jar with pride. I'd kept it there through 3 renovations. When Jessica suggested I streamline the decor, I left that photo untouched. Later that day, I opened the pantry and stared at the shelves. Not because I was hungry, but because I wanted anything that was still mine to open. I reached for the old tin of tea that William had labeled Darjeeling Don't Toss Expensive. The lid stuck slightly. I pried it open, half expecting the leaves to have gone stale. But the scent rose warm and grassy, unchanged. I brewed a cup and brought it to the table, holding the warmth in my palms longer than necessary. I'd once told Jessica that the house would be hers someday, not as a transaction, but as a kind of trust. She'd smiled without looking up from her phone. We'll probably just rent it out. Houses that old aren't efficient. No part of that sentence had space for me. After tea, I opened the closet in the hallway. Behind my winter coat and an umbrella missing a spoke, there was a wooden box where I kept papers William never digitized. Receipts, handwritten ledgers, a list of repairs for the garage door, and at the very bottom, a note in his handwriting. If anything happens, Nancy knows where this is. I touched the corner of the note. The ink had faded to a dull blue. When I was younger, I believed that being needed would make you safe. That usefulness was a kind of shield. Now I saw it for what it was, a temporary condition. Like warmth from a space heater present only while the cord stays plugged in. I stood at the kitchen window again that night. The lavender had drawn bees. One hovered near the glass before drifting upward, slow and directionless. Jessica used to be afraid of bees. She once climbed onto the kitchen table at 8 years old, convinced one was under her chair. I'd scooped it gently into a mason jar and let her watch it wings like stained glass in the sunlight. "Don't kill it," she whispered then. It didn't do anything. Somewhere between then and now, that girl disappeared. I didn't light any lamps. I didn't call again. I sat in the dark until the tea cooled and the room no longer remembered the scent. The forms were still in the drawer, the account still frozen. But there was one thing still in motion, my voice heard by one person who hadn't renamed me into a task. When I placed the phone back on the receiver, I didn't exhale. Not yet. I folded the edges of the tea label back into place. I left the cup unwashed. And for the first time in weeks, I didn't check the mailbox. Some things I've decided are no longer worth waiting for. Some endings begin without ceremony. Just a breath held too long and a voice that doesn't return. The coffee shop smelled faintly of cinnamon and burnt milk. I met Adam there on a Tuesday morning that could have been any other. He didn't try to fix anything. He just sat across from me, steady like a lighthouse that doesn't tell the sea where to go, only where it is. I laid the folded appraisal on the table between us. The page had a faint crease where I'd smoothed it over my lap several times. On top of it, a savings printout, modest, private enough. No one knew about that account, not even William. I didn't explain. The house is still in my name. I'm still living in it. Adam didn't say much. He tapped the corner of the page with his finger and nodded once like he understood what I wasn't saying. I didn't need permission, only a witness. I found Joanne Miller's number tucked into the last pages of William's old address book. The ink had bled slightly, but the digits were still clear. She hadn't changed offices. Her voice on the phone was the same, measured, direct. She remembered William. She remembered the will. "I'd like to reverse the guardianship paperwork," I told her. Quietly. Joanne didn't ask why. She only said what she needed from me. Copies, signatures, no notarization required. In the days after I began moving through the house as if I were visiting someone else's life. I didn't pack anything yet. I only looked. The rooms had more air than I remembered. Maybe I had stopped seeing them years ago. I picked up the pale blue vase from the fireplace mantel, a gift from William for our 25th anniversary. The glaze had cracked in a spiderweb pattern along one side. I ran my thumb over it. Fragile, but intact. The rest, the heavy serving trays, the crystal we never used, I marked with yellow Post-its for donation. Jessica had once told me, standing in this very hallway, "You keep too many things, Mom. None of this is useful." I didn't answer her then. I just turned away and folded towels. That towel is now frayed, but I still keep it. It dries just fine. I called the realtor the next morning. Her name was Lee. She sounded young. No showings, I said, no signs, just a quiet listing. "Most sellers want traffic," she replied. "Are you sure I'm sure?" She paused before responding, then said she'd be in touch with paperwork. I gave her my email. Not Jessica's, not Eric's. That afternoon, I removed the picture of Ella from the fridge, her last school photo, the one where she looked so much like Jessica at that age, it startled me. The magnet holding it up read, "Family is everything." It had come in a Christmas basket from someone I didn't remember. I threw the magnet out. I kept the photo. I folded it once gently and slipped it into a drawer. That evening, I opened the linen closet and began sorting. Some sheets I hadn't used since William passed. I kept the plain white set and gave the rest away. I didn't cry. I folded, smoothed, chose. It wasn't about escaping. It was about ownership of my breath, my name, my time. Adam came by on Thursday to help me scan documents. He didn't linger. At one point, he looked at the appraisal and said, "They probably thought you wouldn't notice." I didn't answer. I just tapped the space beside my name. The ink was fading, but it was still there. The next morning, a message from Jessica appeared on my phone. "Let me know when you've thought about everything rationally. We're trying to help." I didn't reply. I opened my journal and copied the message down by hand. Then I closed the book. By Friday, Joanne confirmed the revocation had been filed. No objections, no phone calls, no apology. I stood at the kitchen counter with the letter, holding it in both hands. It felt heavier than paper should. I didn't shred it. I placed it in a folder with William's will and the title to the house. My name again and again in black and white. Before bed, I walked the hallway with a quiet mind. The echo of my own steps reminded me of late nights long ago, Jessica's fever when she was 6. William's pacing when bills were tight, the way Adam used to read aloud from the newspaper, like it was a performance. I didn't carry much from those years, just the parts no one else remembered. That night I brewed chamomile in the teacup I always reached for when I couldn't sleep. A hairline crack ran down one side, sealed long ago with resin. I traced it with my fingertip. Before turning off the lights, I wrote a message to Jessica. "I have reviewed your documents. I do not consent. I will manage my life independently. No guardianship is necessary." I didn't add a sign-off. I didn't ask her to understand. There was nothing more to be said. Some silences aren't cold. They are simply complete. Some mornings, I still reach for the switch on the left side of the bed, forgetting it's on the right now. My hand pauses midair, remembering the shape of another room. I live above an old stone house now. The walls hold the kind of silence that doesn't need to be polite. The ceiling is low, and the floor tilts slightly, as if the room were leaning into the past. There's no television, just a shelf of books left by someone named Lucille, the landlady. She knocks once a week, leaves fresh linens in a basket, never lingers. The first week, I unpacked slowly, not out of care, but because I didn't know where anything should go when nothing needed to be convenient for anyone else. I lined a tin tray with loose tea packets I'd collected over the years. I folded the same sweater 3 times before deciding it didn't belong here, then put it in the back of the closet anyway. One morning, I stood at the kitchen window stirring coffee. The mug had a chip along the rim. I ran my finger over it again and again, not because it hurt, but because it was real. The room held only the sound of the spoon against ceramic. No footsteps above, no distant television from the den downstairs. I realized I didn't need to measure the volume of my presence anymore. That thought stayed with me for hours. I wrote it on a scrap of paper and tucked it behind the sugar tin, not to keep, but to see it once and know it was mine. The lavender pot I planted near the window started with just dirt. I pressed the seeds into the soil with the edge of a teaspoon. They haven't sprouted yet, but I water them every morning. I talk to them sometimes out loud, not because I think they'll answer, but because no one tells me not to now. A letter came from Adam, folded into thirds, with neat care. His handwriting hasn't changed since he was 14, still a little too careful, as if he's afraid the paper might judge him. "If you ever need to stay long-term, you're always welcome. But if you need space right now, we'll hold it quietly for you." There was no expectation hidden in the margins. No guilt tucked between the lines, just breath. The second week, I walked down to the vineyard trail near the edge of town. The vines were bare, their arms twisted skyward like they were trying to remember sunlight. A woman passed by walking a gray dog. She nodded. I nodded back. We didn't say anything. It felt honest. In the afternoon, I organized my papers. The deed, the bank statement, the folder with legal letters, signed by Joanne Miller. I didn't reread them, just made sure they were clean and flat. I placed them in a new envelope, wrote my name on it in pencil, a small act. A name returned to itself. Jessica's name wasn't mentioned in anything. That seemed important. Not to erase her, but to stop letting her be the final word in every page of my life. I washed the curtains in the small sink, hung them out to dry, even though the sun was weak. They fluttered against the stone walls like they were testing what it meant to be soft in public. I left them up even after dusk. No one would complain. No one would say, "That looks messy, Mom." There were no meals to coordinate, no invisible clocks ticking toward someone else's needs. I ate when I felt like it. Sometimes crackers and jam, sometimes soup from the corner market. I forgot to buy milk 3 days in a row. No one noticed. A voice played in my head now and then. Not Jessica's, not Eric's. It was quieter, older. My mother, maybe. Or some version of her I imagined in the years after she passed. You have to make yourself useful. Don't just sit there. I used to take that as a warning. Lately, I've begun to hear it as a question. In the evenings I read. Old cookbooks not for the recipes, but for the notes in the margins. Someone once circled rosewater pudding and scribbled, "Don't forget to double it." I imagined that woman's sleeves rolled up stirring something too sweet in a too small kitchen humming as she worked, not for applause, just because she liked the way rosewater smelled when it warmed. Lucille knocked once last week. I opened the door halfway. She handed me a little box. "You left this downstairs, thought it might be yours." Inside was a pin I hadn't worn in years, shaped like a small silver bird. I must have dropped it during the move. I held it for a long time after she left. Not because it meant anything grand, just because it reminded me of weight, how something so small could still be noticed. That night, I didn't close the window. I let the breeze slip in. A paper napkin from the cafe fluttered off the table. I didn't chase it. In the silence, I heard nothing that demanded fixing. No one calling from another room. No text messages lighting up. Just wind and the gentle sound of the lavender soil shifting under its own weight. I sat on the floor legs, folded under me, and stared at the cracked tile near the heater. It wasn't beautiful, but it was mine. And for the first time in a very long while, I didn't owe anyone an explanation for choosing to stay still. I didn't expect the silence to end with a bank reference number. The phone lit up just as I set down a cup of tea on the windowsill, a name I hadn't saved but knew. His voice carried no edge, no awkwardness, just a functional coldness. "We need clarity on the deed transfer." The bank flagged some movement. "Are you keeping the property or—" There was no pause, no space for breath. No, "How are you, Mom?" No, "Are you well?" Just that flat-clipped question. As if I were a box to check. As if my presence was paperwork. I didn't answer. I reached for the small notepad I kept near the kettle and wrote down the date and time. A habit formed not out of spite, but out of need to remember what actually happened, not how I was supposed to feel about it. Jessica called an hour later. I watched the phone ring 4 times. On the 5th, I let it connect. Her voice was thinner than I remembered, as though coming through gauze. Just a reminder, she began, no greeting. "We're still paying the deposit for the assisted living place. If you're not moving in, we lose the spot." I looked at the envelope on the table. The one with my name and the word guardian still faintly embossed near the fold. She continued, "They only hold vacancies for 60 days. After that, it's gone, and I'm not paying another deposit." I traced the rim of the cup with my thumb. There was a small hairline crack near the handle. It hadn't spread. Not yet. I just think it's irresponsible to keep things hanging like this. I reached for a pencil. Dull tip. No eraser. I wrote down her words slowly, spacing them out like items on a grocery list. Irresponsible. Hanging. Deposit. Spot. That evening, she posted a picture online. A picnic blanket spread under a tree, the kids holding juice boxes, Eric grinning in sunglasses. The caption read, "Family isn't perfect, but we show up for each other. Most of us, anyway." I saved the image. Not out of nostalgia, just as proof like the others. I kept a folder now. Quiet, unshared. A few days later, I walked to the morning market. The same stall greeted me with jars of jam and lavender bundles. Near the end of the row, an elderly woman sat knitting beside a stack of hand-sewn handkerchiefs. "They don't sell like they used to," she murmured when I picked one up. "My children just use paper napkins. Wipe once, throw away." I bought two. One for use, one for the drawer. Later that week, another email came through from Joanne. She had attached the updated title documents. Adam's name was typed neatly below mine, waiting for my initials. I didn't reply immediately. I laid the papers out flat, smoothed the edges. There were no creases, no stains. Everything was sterile, legal clean. That night, I opened the drawer beside the bed. Inside were the handkerchief, the envelope from Jessica, and a birthday card from 3 years ago that still had no signature, just the typed message, "From all of us." I picked up the pen I used for bills and wrote slowly, pressing harder than I needed to. I signed every page. I didn't send a copy to Jessica. I didn't mention the picnic photo. I didn't mention the voicemail or the reminder about the deposit. I simply responded to Joanne with one line, "Please complete the transfer to Adam before the end of the month. No need to notify Jessica unless legally required." No greeting, no sign-off. I folded the papers back into the envelope and walked them to the mailbox the next morning. I didn't wear shoes. The grass was cold, damp. The lid clicked shut without sound. On the walk back, I noticed a dandelion had grown between the cracks of the porch stone. No one planted it. It just found a way through. At lunch, I opened a jar of jam I'd bought at the market and spooned a little over toast. I took a bite slow, then another. No one watched. No one commented on sugar intake. No one moved my plate to make room for theirs. The linen napkin sat folded beside the saucer, ironed, unused. Later that afternoon, I reread the texts from Eric and Jessica. Each line was about the house, the schedule, the money. Not once did they ask about my new place. Not once did they mention Adam's last visit. Not once did they say my name like it meant something besides logistics. I didn't respond. I didn't delete. Each message sat like a receipt. Not of debt, of detachment. I poured myself a second cup of tea and held the mug with both hands. My fingertips landed on the crack again. Still there. Still shallow. I pressed my lips to the rim sipped and placed it back down gently this time. I opened the drawer once more and moved the handkerchief to the side. I placed the folded receipt from the title transfer beside it. Not everything has to be buried. Some things are better left visible. When Adam texts, it's brief. "Let me know if you need anything, that's all. No pressure. Just air." I don't reply right away. I stare at the dandelion through the screen. It hasn't been picked. It hasn't been named. It just stays. Sometimes I still catch myself reaching for a second plate as if someone else will be joining me. I've stopped correcting the habit. I let it happen, then quietly put the extra plate away. Not in shame, just acknowledgement. Habits don't always mean longing. They can simply be residue. At Fern and Oak, the mornings begin with Bach or Nina Simone, depending on how I slept. I arrive early before the owner and take a small pleasure in being the first to turn the key. The bell on the door has a soft ring, not shrill. I clean the glass counter where we keep old maps and first editions. Then I take inventory of the secondhand classics. Some have notes in the margins, faded underlines, names written inside the front cover. I never erase them. My section is literature, classic. No one assigned it to me. I just started rearranging the Austen and Baldwin titles one day, and they let me keep doing it. Sometimes customers ask if I recommend anything with a bit of weight, but not too dark. I hand them a copy of Ethan Frome and say, "It's not dark, it's honest." They usually buy it. After work, I walk home. I pass the same bakery, the same row of mailboxes. Sometimes Mrs. Cormack waves from her porch, asks if I've had supper. Once she hinted she might need someone to watch her spaniel over the weekend. I smiled and answered, "I'm not taking on anything new right now." She blinked twice, surprised, then laughed. I didn't explain. I no longer do. At night, I cook something plain. Lentils maybe, or a roast vegetable. I don't have to babysit. I eat with a book open beside me, not for distraction, just company of another kind. This month I've been rereading Their Eyes Were Watching God. Some sentences I read aloud like tasting something out loud to remember it. A few days ago, Adam's envelope arrived. The handwriting was his, but the drawing inside wasn't. Lily had painted lavender in watercolor. The stems were crooked, the purple ran past the lines, and one of the blossoms had a smiling face inside. Adam included a note. "She wants to learn. Would you show her?" I drew my own version carefully, using a pencil I had sharpened with a kitchen knife. I labeled the sections, then shaded them in with gentle strokes. On the back, I wrote, "You can let the color go outside the lines if it helps you feel the bloom." I walked it to the post office. The woman at the desk offered me a pre-printed envelope with sunflowers. I shook my head. I wanted it plain. The clock had stopped ticking years ago. William's watch had sat at the back of my dresser, next to a pair of cufflinks no one claimed. Last week, I took it to a shop 2 streets over, where a man with thick glasses said, "This model's seen better days." I told him I have too. He cleaned it, replaced the band with a soft leather one, and adjusted the ticking until it matched real time again. It doesn't remind me of him. Not exactly. It reminds me that once I used to count minutes like they were mine. Jessica hasn't called in weeks. I don't mark the days since her voice. I don't scroll through her posts anymore. But once by accident, I saw a photo someone else had liked Jessica in a pale yellow dress, holding a drink captioned, "Learning to Let Go." I didn't click on it. I just remembered the dress. I had sewn it for her when she turned 23. The hem had been uneven. She hadn't noticed. My phone rings only when it must. Joanne checks in now and then with brief messages, confirmations, not conversations. I told her to go ahead with the final transfer. I used the word final on purpose. At the Saturday market, I bought a hand-stitched handkerchief from a woman with silver braids and eyes like fog. She said, "They're useless now. My kids just use tissues." I nodded and gave her cash, folding the handkerchief slowly, not because I needed it, but because I could choose it. In the evening, I sat by the window mending a tear in my sleeve. The thread didn't match. I didn't care. I liked the quiet concentration, the steady rhythm. A part of me whispered that someone would have commented, "Why not just buy a new one?" But I didn't follow the voice. I let it go unanswered. Adam wrote again. This time just a postcard. On the back, "Still saving you a seat at dinner if you ever want it. No RSVP needed." I placed it beside the clock. Not as a promise, as proof. When I look in the mirror now, I don't search for old outlines. I don't scan for the shape of a mother, a wife, a placeholder. I see a woman with lines around her mouth, a slight tilt to one shoulder, and an unfamiliar lightness in how she carries her neck. Not pride, not defiance, just A self I can stand beside, not behind. No one tells me what time to wake up. No one remarks when I don't wear makeup. The old navy blouse with the missing button, I still wear it. The mug with the chipped edge. Still my favorite. I no longer ask who I am to them. I ask what I am to myself. And most mornings, the answer fits into the stillness between sips of coffee and the soft scratch of pencil on paper. I don't owe anyone an explanation. Not anymore. I never realized how quiet paper could be until I held a manila envelope full of names I no longer answered to. There was no ceremony to the sorting. I laid out the documents like ingredients I didn't plan to cook with again. Marriage certificate, joint savings account, closure notices, a brittle photocopy of the old household registry with my name boxed in red pen. Jessica's handwriting. Not mine. The envelope had a seal that made a small, definite sound when pressed shut. It reminded me of a button snapping closed on a coat I no longer wore. I didn't write much on the note. Just a sentence: I no longer belong to this system. Don't list me as your dependent. Live your life, let me live mine. I mailed it registered signature required. Not for legal weight, for gravity. Later that morning, I walked to the municipal office. The clerk looked at my driver's license, then asked if I wanted to update the emergency contact field. I said no. He blinked once, entered something into the system, and handed me back my ID, now bearing only one last name. Not hyphenated, not inherited, just the one I was born with. It looked small without the rest, but it also looked like mine. I signed the final form to withdraw my name from any co-owned properties. I didn't list a reason. There wasn't a field for gradual erasure, or I was expected to vanish anyway. On the way home, I passed the bakery and bought a single almond tart, not because it reminded me of anyone, because I wanted one. Back in the apartment, I opened the bottom drawer of the desk. The photo was there, Jessica's birthday years ago. Everyone smiling. Cake with too much frosting. I was there too, but not in the picture. Just behind the edge of the table, one hand holding a plate, half a shoulder visible. The camera had caught me mid-step, half in, half out. I studied it for a moment. Then I placed it in the sink and struck a match. The flames curled in quietly, like they had no one to impress. I scrubbed out the ashes and dried the basin with a dish towel. I didn't leave a trace. Not because I was hiding it, just because I was done with it. The cupboard held only one teacup now. A blue-rimmed one I found at the second-hand store for $2. I brewed jasmine tea in the pot I used. Most often, the handle chipped at the top. I never bothered to replace it. Some things once chipped serve better in solitude. That afternoon, a notification popped up. Jessica had updated her family section online. My name was gone, replaced by a blank space. No one would notice. No one would wonder. That in itself was a kind of confirmation. The next day, I walked to the credit union and opened a separate account under my restored name. The clerk smiled when she read it. That's a strong name. I nodded and tucked the new checkbook into my bag. I didn't need her to know it was once considered too old-fashioned. I didn't need to defend it anymore. I stopped at the post office afterward. There was a letter from Adam, inside a Polaroid of Lily standing next to a whiteboard. She had written, "My grandma taught me lavender is stubborn and soft." The "and" was underlined twice. I put the photo on the bookshelf beside the clock that no longer ticked. I had taken the battery out myself, not to silence it, just to stop counting. In the evening, I opened the closet and gathered what remained of the clothes with embroidered initials, monogrammed towels, the old calendar marked family appointments. I tied them into a plain white garbage bag. I didn't take them to the trash. I took them to the laundromat's donation bin. Not because someone else might use them, because I wouldn't. I didn't leave a note inside. The air in the apartment has a certain stillness now. Not absence, not emptiness, just unoccupied permission. I no longer rush to check if the phone is charging. It hasn't rung in days. I haven't missed it. The silence doesn't ask anything of me. The small table by the window has no centerpiece, just wood uneven, lightly splintered, warm when the sun touches it. I drink my tea there, slowly. The ring box once hidden in the back of the drawer is empty. I gave the band to a neighbor's son last week. He was proposing to his girlfriend and couldn't afford a new one. He asked if I was sure. I said it was never mine to keep, just mine to release. He cried. I didn't. This morning, I walked past the mirror and didn't stop. I didn't need to check for approval. I knew what I looked like. I knew I was no longer waiting for anyone to name me. I boiled water. I poured it over the tea leaves. I didn't set another place. I didn't apologize for the quiet. And for the first time, there were no titles lingering in the room. No mom, no Mrs. Randall, a no dependent beneficiary, cosigner, guest. Just me, with no obligation to appear in anyone's story but my own. Not edited, not footnoted, not erased, only named. Once. And enough. I don't keep an alarm clock by the bed anymore. No one waits for me in the kitchen. No footsteps above or below, no drawers opening with expectation. And this morning, that felt like a gift I didn't need to unwrap. I lit the stove and waited for the kettle to hum. No rush. The windows held a soft light behind the linen curtain, and the lavender on the balcony had turned upward overnight, its buds tipped with the faintest purple. That kind of progress doesn't announce itself. It just continues. I chose the cream-colored teacup. It's the only one I bought since moving here. I held it in the store longer than I meant to, running my thumb over the glaze like it might tell me something. I remember the clerk offering to wrap it. I told her no, I'd carry it. The chamomile smelled faintly sweet as the water met the dried blossoms. The steam curled toward the ceiling, then away. I didn't follow it. The balcony chair creaked a little under my weight. I let my feet rest against the railing, ankles crossed. Not ladylike, just mine. I looked at the pot of lavender and thought of William, not as a wound, not as a question, just as a season that came and did what it was meant to do. There was a time I thought love meant anchoring yourself to someone's needs, holding your breath until they were fed, rested sure. William never asked for that, but I did it anyway. I don't know if he noticed, or if noticing would have changed anything. I think of Adam sometimes the way a gardener checks on a plant without touching it. He writes more than I expected, always by hand. I haven't seen him in person since the fall, but the space between us doesn't ache the way I thought it would. His letters feel like small confirmations. Jessica used to write like that, before email, before the idea that urgency was proof of love. I keep a small box of her old notes. One of them says, "Don't forget to bring your sweater, it might be cold after sunset." I read it once a year. Not for her, for the reminder that once someone thought of me at the edge of a day. The letter today wasn't from Adam. It was from Lily. Inside was a drawing of a woman standing in a garden, arms out, surrounded by color. No face, no name, just a sentence written in uneven pencil. "Mom says you're like wind. You're there even when we can't see you." I placed the drawing on the fridge door with the same magnet I'd once used to hold gas bills and overdue reminders. I didn't reply. I didn't post about it. I didn't fold it away for safekeeping. Some things don't require response. They only ask to be received. I rinsed the teacup and left it on the drying mat. The silence in the kitchen had a softness I didn't disturb. I sat at the table and opened the book I'd been meaning to return to. Walden. The corner of one page had been turned long ago. I don't remember when I marked it, but the crease held firm. I smoothed it flat, then read the words slowly aloud but barely audible. I went to the woods because I wished to live deliberately. I paused, not for understanding, for resonance. Once I read that line, hoping it would tell me how to begin again. Today, I read it knowing I already had. The church bell rang from several blocks away. I didn't count the chimes. I just let them come. Even sounds can arrive without needing permission. There's no longer a folder labeled Important Family Documents in my drawer. I shredded the last of them 2 days ago. It felt practical, not dramatic. I haven't been called mom in weeks. Not aloud, not even accidentally. It doesn't feel like a loss anymore. Just a role that stopped showing up in the credits. At the market, a man once asked if I lived alone. I nodded. He waited for more. I didn't offer it. "You seem like someone who knows how to be still," he eventually said. I handed him exact change and said nothing. Stillness isn't about waiting. It's about not chasing. I now cook enough for one. Not two, not leftovers. I buy plums and eat them over the sink. I use the good napkin even when I'm alone. Especially then. There's a blouse I wear that has a loose seam under the left arm. I've stitched it twice. It keeps coming undone. I keep wearing it. I don't own a calendar. I wake up when I wake up. I water the plants when they seem to lean. That's enough rhythm for now. I no longer introduce myself with relation. Not mother of, not widow of, not used to work at. Just my name. That's often all anyone really wants anyway. Sometimes people pause expecting me to fill in the silence. I let it stretch. At the library last Thursday, a woman asked what I was reading. I turned the cover toward her. She smiled and moved on. Not every moment has to become a connection. I've grown to enjoy that truth. I watch the light move through my apartment without needing to catch it. I let it leave when it's ready. I think about legacy less and rhythm more. I no longer measure a day by how much I gave away, but by how gently I held my own hours. The photo albums are gone. I remember what I want to. I forget the rest. The name on my mail matches the one I say out loud. The keys in my pocket open only my door, and when I close it at night, I no longer look back to see who's following. I sit. I breathe. I live not to prove anything, just to live.